Hi again then guys, and welcome back to a series which we put on hold a little while ago because of the reshuffle of schedule on the channel, but now we are returning to it as one of our other series of course came to an end. And this series is a series which those who have come to the channel over the past say month or so probably won't be as familiar with. And this series is called Forget Your Warranty, and basically what this series is for is the aftermarket tuner cars of Gran Turismo, but not just JDM cars in general like Skylines and Supras. This series is specifically for the vehicles which are production models, generally speaking at least, that are then tuned by an aftermarket company and then offered in that form on the game. So stuff like the HPA Golf, the Amuse Honda S2000s, all that kind of thing. There are some competition vehicles within this category. You've got some drift cars, you've got some time attack cars like the HKS CT230R Evo, and a couple of other things there as well. Some of them are more just showing what the company's parts are capable of. That applies more to companies like HPA, where they're showing the kind of upgrades that they sell and what they can do for your vehicle. So it's more like a rolling piece of marketing, which is pretty cool as well, if you ask me. But in this particular episode, we're returning to a brand which we've talked about before, Amuse. We've already discussed one of the Amuse S2000 GT1s, the premium turbo version, which is a massively popular aftermarket tuner car on Gran Turismo, one of the most popular in the game in fact, and we've already discussed the S2000 Street version, which is the entry-level model. It looks slightly different, I would say in a good way. It's got some decent numbers, and it's one of the more affordable aftermarket tuner cars. Now though, we're moving up a rung on the performance ladder. Not quite as high as the GT1, but definitely higher than the Street version. And this particular model is the S2000 R1. And this is an interesting car. It bridges the gap between street car and pure track-only race car pretty well. It has some influences of time attack machine there for sure, and again, like with HPA, it does offer some of those upgrades that you can get from Amuse and shows what they can do for your car. In this case, a Honda S2000. So the main question that arises, of course, is it a good car? Especially when you're forking out potentially 125 grand before you've even done anything to it. That's quite a lot of cash for a Honda S2000. Now, when you're paying out 250 grand for the GT1, you can kind of understand why. It's a powerful car, it looks fantastic, it's essentially a totally different animal to the normal S2000. With the street version, it's a much cheaper vehicle anyway, so that's more justified. With this car, it could potentially go either way. For 125 grand, it could be fantastic, but it could also potentially be just quite simply too expensive for what it has to offer. So what does it have to offer? Well, as I believe we mentioned in the S2000 Street episode, the numbers on this car don't actually increase that much over the Street S2000. It's not a massive jump. The difference between the S2000 Street version and the GT1 is quite noticeable. With this car, not so much. It's still, of course, as you'd expect, powered by a turbocharged 2-litre engine. Of course, it's still rear-wheel drive. It is lightweight at 1,041 kilos, but that's not really that much different to the Street version. You're looking at 481 horsepower per tonne, which, interestingly, is actually lower than the Street version, which has 486, but this car does have more torque at 294 foot-pounds to 287 of the Street version. So it kind of goes back and forth as far as on-paper specs. The horsepower per tonne is 462, which, funnily enough, is exactly 1 horsepower per tonne less than the Street version, and the maximum PP level, with all of its upgrades, is 557. And for me personally, I would say that that PP level along with the price are the two most intriguing things about this car. Because first of all, it costs more than double the price of the Street version. Secondly, even though the numbers aren't necessarily that better, in fact in some cases they're actually inferior, the PP is a lot higher nonetheless. The Street version sits at 543, this car sits at 557. That's quite a notable increase for a vehicle which doesn't have a notable increase in on-paper numbers. The horsepower is lower, the weight isn't much different, and the torque is barely higher at all. So why is the PP so much higher? Well, that's a good question, because as far as on-paper numbers, there isn't really much of a justifiable reason for that to be the case. What about in practice, though? Is it actually one of those vehicles, and there are definitely some like this, that don't necessarily have the best numbers on paper, but in practice are actually a lot better than those numbers would dictate, maybe even against other versions of that same car? Well, in the case of this car, I would say yes, thankfully. Very thankfully for a 125 grand model, it does actually perform far better than the difference in numbers would suggest. The street version is a very nice car, but it's not a monster. This car is a fantastic track car. It's not necessarily on the same level as, say, the Opera S2000, which is a fantastic track machine, but this is definitely a step up from the street model. The street model is a great car, but it's very much, as the name suggests, a street car. It feels like a street car. It's not really a huge jump from the normal Honda S2000. It's just a slightly alternative, more exotic feeling version of the S2000, whereas this car really does feel like a much more hardcore track focused S2000, and although the weight isn't that much different to the street version, it feels as though it is. This easily feels like a 900 kilo car. It really does feel that good around corners. You can actually take some corners, for instance here at Willow Springs, basically with full throttle all the way around the corner, and there's not many cars that you can do that with. Now, if you are an S2000 fan, this is definitely a good one to go for, because it offers the kind of performance that you'd expect from a track car, or even a race car, but in what is still technically eligible as a street car. So overall, it's definitely worth checking out if that sounds appealing to you. And that's it for this particular pick, so I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.